My name is Marianne Cole. I'm 57, and for most of my adult life, I existed in the soft quiet between errands, dinner plans, and the hollow rituals that come with staying married longer than you should. I used to be an art teacher, oils and charcoal. Kids loved my chaos. But when Richard got promoted, and we moved into the bigger house, he said we could finally afford for me to focus on just being home. I told myself I chose it. That folding his shirts into clean, perfumed rectangles was my new art. That love meant adapting, even when you were the only one doing it. But love has a way of aging faster than people. And silence, it gets heavy when no one listens. Before we get into the details of the story, let me quickly thank you for your continuous support. This means a lot to us. If you enjoy the stories we share, kindly subscribe to this channel. It will be great if you can leave a comment on which city you are watching from. We might just give you a shout out in our next story. Today's special shout out goes to Jennifer Bray from Chicago. We are glad you enjoy our stories. Now let's go deeper into the story. It happened on a Thursday. A stupid, normal Thursday with leftover casserole in the fridge, and a thunderstorm just threatening the edge of the sky. I'd spent the day polishing silver I hadn't used since 2004, and talking myself out of a second glass of wine. The door opened around 6. I remember the exact moment, because I had one sock off and a hand under the couch cushion searching for the remote. He walked in laughing. Not at me, not even to me, but toward someone behind him. A girl. She had hair like river silk, and heels that clicked like punctuation. I thought maybe she was someone's intern, or a new coworker he was helping. He barely glanced at me, just placed his keys in the bowl and said, "This is Lila. She's my new wife. You've become boring." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I stood up slowly, like the air had turned into soup and my legs were remembering how to move through it. Lila blinked, uncomfortable for exactly one heartbeat before she smiled at me like a guest meeting the former homeowner. I looked at my husband of 30 years. And I tried to find the man who used to kiss my shoulder blades while I made coffee. I didn't see him. All I saw was this smug, self-satisfied stranger who thought he could toss me aside like a dinner set gone out of style. He didn't argue. He didn't apologize. He just looked proud of himself, like this moment had been rehearsed, and I was the last one to learn my line. I asked if she knew I still lived here. She laughed. He didn't answer. That night, I lay in bed beside him for the last time. He slept easily. I watched the ceiling fan spin, listening to the rhythm of his breath and thinking about all the ways silence could be more violent than shouting. I thought about the roast chicken I had planned for Sunday, about the wine I'd been saving for our anniversary next month, about the dozen unread texts from friends I no longer saw because Richard preferred to keep things quiet. I wanted to ask why. I wanted to tear the sheets from the bed and scream that I wasn't boring. I was buried, but I didn't say a word, because he wanted drama, and what I gave him was absence. The next morning I made him coffee like always, set it down on the counter and waited for him to ask what was wrong. He didn't. He left early, saying Lila was picking him up and they'd be looking at new places to live that didn't feel haunted. That was the word he used. Haunted. I waited until I heard the garage close behind him, and then I picked up the phone. Not to call a friend. Not to cry. I called the lawyer my sister once recommended after her own implosion. I hadn't spoken to my sister in years, but I remembered the name. That felt important. Like I had left myself a breadcrumb long before I knew I'd be starving. When the lawyer asked how soon I wanted to proceed, I told her. Immediately. I didn't ask for advice. I didn't want to talk about my feelings. I just wanted the paperwork. The legal beginning of an end I hadn't chosen but would now control. That afternoon, I moved my grandmother's jewelry into a locked box. Hid documents in the trunk of my car. I left the bed unmade, the dishes in the sink. And then I sat at the dining room table with the ghost of who I had been. I let her cry. I let her rage. I told her it was almost over. And when I finally stood, I wasn't the same woman who had lost everything. I was someone who had been handed a match and a house soaked in gasoline. The strange thing was how easy it was to disappear. Not in the theatrical sense. No passports or aliases, no running off to foreign cities. Just the quiet kind. The kind where you stop refilling the prescription bottles for someone who never remembered to say thank you. Where you let the voicemail pick up. even when it's your own mother calling. The kind of disappearance where you still sleep in your own bed but piece by piece you stop being there. I didn't cry when I left. Not once. I had already spent too many years softening the edges of a man who believed I was lucky to be kept. What I felt now wasn't sadness. It was something colder, leaner, a clarity that came with the kind of betrayal, so cleanly executed it felt like a signature. Richard didn't notice the small things first. He never did. Not when I took the family photo off the hallway wall. The one from our 25th anniversary trip to Lisbon. Not when I stopped making dinner and started claiming a late lunch. I left a few dirty dishes in the sink to keep up appearances, but the pantry was emptying fast. I stopped buying the things only he liked, sugar-free cookies. That bitter breakfast tea from England he swore tasted like home. I was still there technically, but in all the ways that mattered I was gone. When he began spending more nights out, I let him. I didn't ask where. I didn't care. That silence was my warning shot. My lawyer Dana was precise. The kind of woman who wore heels that could cut glass and never apologized for her intelligence. I liked her immediately. Keep emotion out of it, she said during our second meeting. Emotion is how they win. Paperwork is how you win. She asked if I wanted the house. I told her no. Let him keep it. Let it rot. I wanted liquidity. I wanted leverage. I wanted out. Dana worked quickly, drafting filings with surgical efficiency. She instructed me to start moving valuables. Anything sentimental or legally ambiguous, out of the home before he got suspicious. I rented a storage unit 30 miles away and labeled each box with something innocuous. Christmas decor, old textbooks, donations. But inside those boxes were pieces of me he never saw. My sketchbooks, my grandmother's brooch, the Polaroids from college that used to make him jealous. I wasn't hiding. I was reclaiming. What surprised me most was how easy it was to keep my silence around him. You'd think after 30 years your body would betray you. Tear up at the sight of him, flinch at his voice, ask for crumbs of affection. But I felt nothing. One night he came home smelling like whatever cologne Lila had bought him. Sickly sweet, synthetic, loud. He said, "You're being distant," as if I owed him nearness. I nodded and said, "I'm tired." That was true. Just not in the way he thought. I wasn't tired from work or chores. I was tired of carrying a man whose only language was dominance disguised as charm. His eyes lingered a little longer than usual that night, like maybe he suspected something had shifted. But I smiled soft, bland, empty. Let him think I was broken. Broken women are predictable. Strategic ones are not. I started spending afternoons at a pottery studio I hadn't visited in over a decade. The place still smelled like clay and linseed oil, and the owner, a quiet man named Jonah, pretended not to recognize me. I liked that. I liked that I could walk in and not be anyone's wife. Just a woman in an apron coaxing bowls from mud. My hands shook the first few times I tried the wheel. Not from nerves, from restraint. It took everything in me not to scream into the clay, to let it all pour out in some dramatic collapse. But that wasn't who I was anymore. I was rebuilding something slower, uglier, stronger. The kind of strength that comes from not needing to explain yourself anymore. A week after the divorce papers were served, quietly, through Dana's channels, Richard finally confronted me. He slammed the envelope down on the table and said, "Are you serious?" I looked at him long and flat. Dead serious. He laughed like it was a joke, like I'd come to my senses. "You're not even angry," he said. "You're not crying. You don't yell. What kind of woman leaves like this?" I didn't answer. Because the kind of woman who leaves like this is the kind of woman you never saw coming. The kind who was invisible until she decided to haunt you. He stormed out. I finished my tea. I didn't watch him go. The day I left for good, I didn't pack a suitcase. I took only what was mine, what had always been mine, and walked out in broad daylight. The house felt smaller than it used to, like a museum of someone else's life. I paused only once, in the doorway of the bedroom where I'd spent years memorizing the sound of a man who no longer loved me. There was a photo of us on the dresser. I took it, not to keep but to burn later. Felt like a ritual. I closed the door gently, not to be polite, but to be final. The kind of final that echoes long after footsteps fade. Outside, the air felt cleaner. Not freer, that would come later, but cleaner. I didn't smile. I didn't breathe deep like some movie character claiming their first taste of independence. I just walked, one foot after the other, toward a car packed with only what I needed, toward a studio filled with blank clay, toward a silence I chose for myself. And I didn't look back. Not once. I didn't recognize myself the first morning I woke up alone. Not because anything had changed on the outside. I still looked like the same woman who folded laundry by color, who pressed napkins into clean rectangles for invisible guests, but because something inside me had unclenched. The kind of release that happens when you finally admit no one's coming to save you. There was a small ache in my chest, sure, but it wasn't grief. It was space. And space meant I had room to become someone again. Someone who wasn't molded by his preferences, by his schedule, by his silences. For the first time in decades, I brewed coffee the way I liked it. Strong. Unfiltered.
No vanilla syrup.
I stood by the window and drank it slowly, not because I was savoring the peace, but because I needed to learn what it meant to take up time and not apologize. The apartment I moved into was a one-bedroom above a bakery. Small, a little drafty, with uneven floors and humming pipes. But it was mine. It smelled like flour and sugar most mornings, and there was a nail in the wall I hung my apron on like some kind of ceremony. I bought mismatched plates from a thrift store because they made me laugh, because they had chips and cracks and character like me. I didn't decorate with anything from the old house. Not even the blessed sign Richard once insisted made us look relatable. Instead, I hung my own paintings. The first ones I'd made in years. They were messy, streaked with reds and grays and this deep bruised blue I couldn't quite name. I didn't show them to anyone. Not yet. But they watched me like witnesses while I figured out what it meant to be both free and afraid. There's a kind of emotional limbo that comes after you stop surviving but before you start thriving. Most days I lived there. Floating. Not numb, just paused. People talk about reinvention like it's this glamorous process. A haircut, a makeover, a bold new wardrobe. But in truth, it's quieter. More brutal. It's paying your own bills with shaking hands because you never had to before. It's buying groceries and realizing you don't know what you like to eat when you're not planning around someone else's preferences. It's walking into a room and not being sure if anyone sees you, or if you even want them to. I didn't post anything online. I didn't tell old friends where I was. I let rumors do the work for me. I wanted Richard to sit in that silence, wondering what I was doing, who I was with, how far I'd gone. I wanted him to feel the absence of the woman he once mistook for furniture. It wasn't long before I returned to Jonah's pottery studio. There was something about the mess of it I needed, about spinning clay between my fingers and forcing it into shape. The first bowl I made collapsed on itself. The second, too thin. But by the fifth, I started to feel my hands remember who I was. Jonah didn't ask questions. He just nodded when I stayed late. Sometimes he played jazz. Sometimes we worked in silence. I liked that. Liked the way the quiet didn't demand anything from me. One night, he looked over at the deep red vase I just pulled from the kiln and said, "This looks angry." I didn't respond. But he was right. I wasn't healed. I wasn't whole. I was sculpting my fury into silence. And it felt good. I started journaling, not for therapy, but for clarity. Writing helped me trace patterns I hadn't noticed while living them. Things Richard used to say. The way he'd dismiss my ideas with a tight smile or a backhanded compliment. "You're so passionate. Almost too passionate. Let's not get carried away. You're beautiful when you don't try so hard." At the time they sounded like observations. Now I saw them for what they were, restraints. Polite little prisons built from flattery and control. And I'd swallowed everyone like communion. It sickened me, the realization that I'd edited myself for so long I no longer knew where I ended and he began. But that sickness became fuel. Because if I could unlearn him, I could rebuild myself. There was a gallery opening downtown a few months into my new life. Nothing grand, just a small exhibit of local artists. Jonah encouraged me to submit one of my pieces. I hesitated. My work wasn't beautiful, not in the traditional sense. It was raw, fractured. But maybe that was the point. I sent in a few pieces under a pseudonym, MC Lark. Lark, like the bird I used to draw on my notebooks in college. The one I told myself I'd tattoo if I ever felt free. I wore a black dress to the opening. Not new thrifted but sharp. People stood in front of my piece and tilted their heads. No one knew it was mine. That anonymity gave me a kind of power I hadn't felt in years. They were looking at my pain, my rage, my reclamation, and they were calling it art. Around this time, Richard's calls started again. First it was a single voicemail, then 2, then 5. The tone changed each time. At first he was curious. Just wanted to see how you're doing. Then impatient. You don't have to ignore me. Then wounded. I thought 30 years meant something. I didn't respond. I saved each one. Not to use. Just to remember. He sounded smaller now. Not the man who threw me away in front of a girl with wine-stained lips and Instagram eyes. Just a man realizing he wasn't the sun after all. That I could rise without him. I didn't hate him. Not anymore. Hatred would have tethered me. What I felt was colder. A kind of detachment that looked like indifference but was built on survival. He had tried to erase me by replacing me. But now I had become someone he couldn't recognize. And that, I realized, was the beginning of revenge. Not in flames or fury, but in reinvention. In building a life so complete, so full, that he couldn't even cast a shadow on it. He didn't see me coming. That was the point. I didn't make noise. I didn't post cryptic quotes or hint at a comeback. I didn't drop breadcrumbs for him to follow. I simply lived in the silence he left behind until I could shape it into something stronger than rage. And when I finally stepped back into his orbit, it wasn't with fireworks. It was with the kind of stillness that makes people nervous, the kind that says, I'm not here for you. I'm here for the space you thought you could take from me. My return was never about being seen. It was about being undeniable. It started with a gallery opening. One of those semi-pretentious wine and caviar events where people speak softly and pretend to understand what red lines on canvas mean. Jonah had encouraged me to submit a piece under my pseudonym, MC Lark. I hadn't told him what I planned to wear, how I planned to move through that space, or that I already knew Richard would be there. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't even confrontation. It was reclaiming the rooms I used to walk through as a shadow, now on my own terms. I wore a slate gray dress, structured minimal. No jewelry. Just clean skin, a sharp neckline, and the silence of someone who no longer had anything to prove. When I walked in, the first thing I noticed was the lighting. It was too bright in all the wrong places, washing out the edges of the art, but somehow that felt appropriate. Richard always did like appearances more than substance. He stood near the center of the room, drink in hand, surrounded by people pretending to laugh. I recognized the pattern of his stance, the tilt of his head, the subtle touch on the arm of the woman he was speaking to. Empty gestures designed to suggest intimacy. But none of them meant anything now. Not when I could walk past him without my breath catching. Not when the floor no longer moved beneath me at the sight of him. He saw me about 15 minutes in. I was speaking with a curator about a sculpted installation made of glass and rusted steel. The curator didn't know who I was, just someone offering observations with enough bite to seem insightful. Then Richard turned. I don't know if he recognized me at first. Maybe he saw a shape he used to know. A face too far from the kitchen counter he left it at. But then our eyes met, and his smile faltered. Not disappeared. Richard had always trained his face well, but it cracked at the corners. And that crack was all I needed. He approached as I was admiring a photograph of a burned-out church framed in black wood. Marianne, he said, like he wasn't sure if saying my name would bring me closer or push me away. I turned slowly, controlled. Richard, I replied. Not warmly. Not coldly. Just enough to let the name feel foreign in my mouth. I didn't expect to see you here, he said, glancing down at his glass as if it might offer a better excuse. I smiled, small, sharp, fleeting. I'm sure you didn't. I could see him scanning me. Not sexually. Strategically. As if trying to find a familiar flaw, some trace of the woman he once manipulated like a marionette. But I'd burned that woman down to ash. He glanced toward the sculpture in the center of the room. Is this one yours? I didn't answer. I let the question hang. Let him feel what it was like to be the one left waiting. Does it matter? I said finally. He blinked. I just meant, it looks like your style. I nodded. Maybe that's the point. I walked away before he could fumble through another half-baked apology. Not fast. Not rude. Just firm. My heels didn't click loudly on the floor. But somehow I knew he'd remember the sound anyway. Over the next few weeks, his attempts came slowly. Like someone dipping a toe into ice water, unsure if pain or numbness would come first. A voicemail the night after the opening. You looked different. I mean that in a good way. I didn't respond. 3 days later, an email. Would love to catch up. Just coffee. No pressure. I archived it. Then the old tricks. Passive guilt wrapped in nostalgia. I found one of your sketchbooks. The one with the bird drawings. I didn't answer, but my hands shook for a full minute afterward. Not from longing, but from the muscle memory of being baited. What Richard never understood was that I wasn't avoiding him. I was observing him, watching him navigate the space where my absence used to live. He was unraveling in slow motion, showing up at galleries he used to mock, asking mutual acquaintances about me with feigned casualness. His mask was slipping. The version of me he discarded had returned, not as a wife, but as a name people whispered with admiration. MC Lark? She's brilliant. A little mysterious. And I let them whisper. I let him guess. Because ambiguity was now my armor. He finally cornered me at a solo showcase a month later. My piece had sold within the first hour, and I was standing near the back, sipping ginger tea and watching strangers interpret my pain. You didn't even tell me you were showing, he said. I turned. Why would I? He looked down, embarrassed but not sorry. Never sorry. I miss talking to you, he said. You were the only one who ever really got me. That part almost made me laugh. Because he was right, but only in the sense that I saw him. I just didn't want him anymore. I don't think you miss me, I said. I think you miss the version of yourself you believed in when I was around. He opened his mouth, closed it. You always had a way of saying things that cut. I shook my head. No, you just never thought I'd say them out loud. I didn't linger. I thanked the event host, complimented another artist's work, and left without looking back. And I could feel it as I walked out. The weight of his gaze, the pit of his regret, the slow understanding that I had returned, not for him, but for me. The first time he cried, it was through a voicemail. I was trimming a bonsai on my balcony, something small I'd picked up from a neighbor who said quiet things deserve attention too. When my phone lit up. No name, just the number I never deleted. His voice cracked midway through the second sentence. I don't know how this happened, he said. I miss you. I'm not sleeping. The message was 3 minutes long, and I let it play out without flinching. Not because I was cruel, but because I'd already rehearsed this moment in the stillness of my new life. I knew he'd eventually crumble. Men like Richard don't build, they absorb. And when their source dries up, they don't die with dignity. They decay noisily, hoping someone will come back and carry the rot for them. He didn't know I'd already won. The house was gone. Sold through a quiet deal Dana orchestrated, before he even realized I had the authority. We had split the assets legally, but I'd outmaneuvered him emotionally. He thought the real estate mattered, that the furniture and the pension, and the last name on the mailbox were where the power lived. But I had taken the things he never noticed I owned. The loyalty of our accountant, the title to his vintage watch collection, the access to his old passwords, because he never thought I'd remember. He hadn't changed them since 2009. His digital footprint was a map of every lie he thought he buried. I never used the information maliciously. I just watched. Quietly. Strategically. I wanted him to feel the walls bend in, not because I pushed, but because he built them from ego and hollow plaster. By the third voicemail, he stopped apologizing. He grew angry instead. You think you're better than me now? He spat. What, because you play with clay and hang around starving artists? It was funny in a way. The same man who once told me to stop wasting time on messy hobbies, now saw those hobbies as weapons. That meant they worked. That meant I worked. And what he couldn't process was that my silence wasn't passive, it was chosen. Meant. Surgical. And nothing terrifies a narcissist more than an audience that stops clapping. Especially one that knows the script better than he does. Lila had left him, of course. Not because she matured or realized some moral epiphany. No. She left because the shine wore off. Because eventually, youth gets tired of being a mirror for someone else's fading relevance. I heard she was in Arizona now, starting a skincare line. Good for her. I didn't hate her. She was 25, insecure, and flattered by money. She wasn't my enemy. She was my evidence. Proof that Richard didn't know how to love anyone. Only how to consume them until they lost their flavor. And now in the same kitchen where he once told me I was boring, He sat alone eating meals he didn't know how to cook, surrounded by furniture I chose, in a house I emptied with a smile. He emailed Dana once, trying to revisit the terms of the divorce. She shut it down before I even had to weigh in. Desperation isn't a legal argument, she said, her tone dry, clean. I liked that. I liked that she saw right through him. That he was, for the first time in his life, being handled without charm or manipulation. I didn't need to fight anymore. Other people were doing it for me now, not because I asked, but because when you stop begging to be seen, the right people start looking on their own. Still, there was one thing left. A letter. He hand-wrote it, an act of desperation wrapped in sentimentality. He left it at the front desk of the gallery where I was showing. No envelope, just folded with my name on the front. I almost didn't open it, but something in me wanted to see how he'd try to rewrite his own ending. Inside it read, "You were right. I thought I could replace you, but all I did was lose myself. I can't sleep in that house without you. Everything smells like absence. I see you in the wallpaper, the closets, the places you clean that I never thanked you for. I was arrogant. I don't deserve forgiveness, but I needed to say it. I miss your laugh. I miss the way you made silence feel safe. I don't even know who I am now." I folded it once and put it in the bottom drawer of my studio desk, next to the cracked tea saucer I'd glued together with gold resin as an experiment in kintsugi. A reminder that some breaks aren't meant to be erased. They're meant to be honored. The letter wasn't a plea, it was a gravestone. A memorial to a version of him that would never return. And I didn't feel pity. I felt confirmation. That the woman he tried to discard had become someone he couldn't even approach without shame. I ran into him once after that. By accident. At a farmer's market I visited every Sunday. He was alone, holding a bruised peach like he didn't know what to do with it. He saw me and froze. I kept walking. Not fast. Not angry. Just forward. He called my name, but I didn't stop. I didn't know him my face anymore. He'd had 3 decades of it. Let him memorize my absence now. Back at home, I made tea. I opened the windows. I played the same jazz Jonah always hums when he thinks no one's listening. And I smiled not because I'd hurt him, but because I didn't have to. His collapse wasn't my orchestration. It was his reward. And I had learned, finally, that the most brutal form of revenge isn't destruction. It's resurrection. Somewhere in the rhythm of reclaiming my life, I stopped needing to look over my shoulder. There was a time when I would pass certain streets and feel my chest tighten, wondering if I'd see him, wondering if I should. That faded. Not all at once, but like a long-held breath finally being exhaled. I had grown used to living without surveillance, without shrinking myself into his comfort. I no longer rehearsed conversations that would never happen, or drafted silent responses to his imaginary apologies. Instead, my thoughts turned to smaller, quieter things. The crack in my studio wall that let the morning light cut in like a spotlight. The way my fingers felt stronger at the wheel now, more certain. The world hadn't changed. But I had. And that was enough. Jonah eventually asked me if the name MC Lark was mine. He didn't do it accusingly, just with the kind of gentle curiosity that feels like being invited to breathe deeper. I nodded. No performance, no deflection. He didn't press. Just said, "Your work makes people feel seen. Even the ugly parts." I think that was the first compliment I believed in years. Not because it flattered me, but because it acknowledged the sharpness I had tried so hard to hide. The truth was, my art was never about beauty. It was about bruises. And now, they were framed on gallery walls, auctioned off for sums that once would have made me uncomfortable. People paid for the pieces of me Richard once called messy, indulgent, too much. That irony sat sweet on my tongue every time I walked past a red dot sticker. One evening, while cleaning out an old box of receipts and records, I found a small card I hadn't seen in decades. It was from my mother, dated the year Richard and I bought our first house. The handwriting was careful, still neat in the way hers had been before the arthritis. It said, "Don't forget who you were before he asked you to become someone else." At the time, I dismissed it as cryptic, maybe even unfair. But now, holding it in my studio lit by a sun that didn't ask for permission, I felt something uncoil. My mother had seen it coming. She hadn't warned me out of spite. She had been speaking to the version of me that might one day need that line to crawl back to herself. I didn't cry. I just folded the card and tucked it into the back of my sketchbook like a quiet benediction. A week later, I returned to the old house. Not out of nostalgia. Curiosity, maybe. Closure, certainly. It had been flipped, painted beige, new windows, the garden I once adored now stripped of its roses. There was a for sale sign out front. A lockbox on the door. Empty again. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. The house had already done its job. It held the woman I used to be until she was ready to leave. And now it was shedding skins like I had. Let someone else fill it. Hopefully someone who wouldn't have to carve themselves hollow to stay. Before I left, I slipped a note into the mailbox. It wasn't addressed to anyone. Just a folded scrap with 6 words. I am not coming back. Ever. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. If he found it, he'd know. If a stranger found it, they might mistake it for heartbreak. But it wasn't. It was liberation in ink. The final punctuation at the end of a sentence I'd been rewriting since the moment he told me I was boring. There was power in letting the past echo into its own silence. That night, I hosted a small dinner at my apartment. Nothing fancy, just 3 friends from the studio, a bottle of wine, music humming low in the background. We ate on mismatched plates. We laughed too loudly. Someone spilled red wine on the rug, and I didn't panic. I just laughed and poured another glass. At one point, Jonah raised a toast. To starting over, he said. I raised mine too. But in my head, the words were different. To reclaiming what was never truly gone. After they left, I stood alone at the window watching the city flicker. I was full, not of people or praise, but of something far rarer, peace. I still carry a few things from the life before. Not out of sentimentality, but because they earned their place. The gold ring tea saucer I once cracked in anger. The necklace Richard gave me our 3rd year, worn now, dulled at the chain, but I kept it not for him, but because it reminded me of who I used to be when I still believed in promises. And I keep his last voicemail, the one where he sounds small. Lost. I don't play it. I don't need to. Just knowing it exists, that he called and I didn't answer is enough. It reminds me of the choice I made, the door I didn't reopen, the silence I didn't break. I never remarried. People ask sometimes softly like it's a wound. It's not. I have love. Deep, warm, quiet love. In friendships, in clay, in the breath between one moment and the next. I don't need a ring to prove I survived. My survival is in every decision I make without fear. In every morning I wake up and don't brace for disappointment. In every room I enter as only myself, no longer someone's echo. And if love ever finds me again, it will not ask me to shrink. It will arrive as an equal, or not at all. So if you ask me what revenge looks like, this is it. Not fire. Not fury. But a life rebuilt so completely that the ashes have nothing left to cling to. A life that doesn't need to be explained to the man who once thought I was replaceable. Because in the end, I didn't want to destroy him. I wanted to disappear so completely from his reach that even memory couldn't find me. And I did. With quiet. With grace. With clay under my nails and sunlight on my cheek. I was never boring. I was just buried. Now I bloom. If this story moved you, stay with us. Subscribe for more deeply personal tales of betrayal, transformation, and quiet revenge. Every day we bring you raw, emotionally charged narratives that remind us just how powerful it can be to walk away, rebuild, and return on your own terms. See you soon in the next story.